So with that introduction, I'd like to introduce Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you very much, and let me thank Dr. Zeitz and Lisa and all of our panelists for first of all, your work each and every day to stamp this pandemic from the face of the earth. Also, I have to acknowledge Christos Santos on my staff, who has represented me so well and has been so much a part of the effort on Capitol Hill to make sure that all of the legislation that Dr. Zeitz mentioned was signed into law. I'm really pleased to be with you today. I've been to all of the international AIDS conferences and participated in them since the Durban conference, since I was elected to Congress in 1998. So I'll provide a congressional perspective very briefly on the value really of this report and on the need for policymakers to integrate programs to more comprehensively address violence against women and children within the context of HIV prevention programs. As we know, the global AIDS pandemic is in many ways driven by the unequal status of women in the developing world. A number of critical factors that make women and girls more vulnerable to HIV include the lack of access to education, independent economic means, or property and inheritance rights, inadequate information and enforcement of gender equality, where those laws exist and or don't exist, and the inability of women to control their own bodies and their own sexual health, or even just to decide when and whom to marry. Each of these factors and more rooted in pervasive gender inequality that is reinforced by cultural attitudes about the proper place and role of women, whether in the context of family, faith, the business community, government, or civil society. Violence against women is perhaps the most egregious example of these ingrained attitudes. Around the world, 1 in 3 women has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. As this report points out, women who have experienced violence are as much as 3 times more likely to acquire HIV. So I want to be clear here, however, violence against women is not solely just a problem for the developing world. In the United States, nearly 1/3 of American women report being physically or sexually abused by a husband or boyfriend at some point in their lives. And as we all know, a substantial number of cases of violence and abuse never do get reported. So what can be done to address this problem? Through its analysis of efforts to address violence in Ghana, Rwanda, and South Africa, the Global AIDS Alliance report points out that this is not an intractable problem. We know how to put together programs that are effective at reducing violence against women and youth, both by supporting programs and to empower women and help change the cultural norms that discriminate against women. And I am pleased that as a part of the PEPFAR legislation that was signed into law last Wednesday, we included language from my bill, the Pathway Act, to help strengthen the focus of gender equality and the empowerment of women in our HIV/AIDS initiatives, specifically within the administration's newly proposed compact agreements. These improvements will help nudge countries along to address HIV and violence against women together, rather than separately or in a piecemeal fashion. And for those of you who were at the last International AIDS Conference in Bangkok, Thailand, we had just introduced the Pathway Act. And there was much discussion in Bangkok about the Pathway Act and the need to repeal the 33% abstinence-only provision. Well, I'm very glad to say that in the new PEPFAR bill, we did repeal it. So it is gone. It is finished. And I think this is a major step in the right direction. Thank you. So fundamentally, yeah, I'm very proud of that, but you should be proud of that because that started in Thailand. We have to strengthen the very organizations and institutions that are doing the lion's share of the work on the ground. So this report is therefore very instructive in highlighting how civil society can play a dual role in both implementing programs and acting as a watchdog on national governments to enforce existing procedures. As one of the report's key recommendations, which I believe it is critical, and that is we directly fund indigenous women's groups to build capacity in countries to address violence against women. And so I'm pleased that the new International Violence Against Women Act, introduced by my chairman, Chairman Berman, includes this recommendation, and I am committed to doing my part to help build support for its eventual passage in Congress. And let me just mention that when I was in the California Senate, I authored the State of California's Violence Against Women Act. I mentioned the U.S. Earlier in my statement, and believe you me, this is a global issue that we have to address in a global fashion. I wore my scarf today. For those of you who are familiar with it, it's a scarf that was given to Congress, members of Congress, 2 years ago. It's called Stop Violence Against Women. It was presented by Lifetime TV channel, which is a television channel for women. But I wore it today because it gives me a lot of hope. They gave this scarf to men and women in the House, and men and women both wore the scarf and continue to wear it as ties. Men as ties and women as scarves. And so I do this and share this because I have a lot of hope that we're going to pass our bill, because I believe there's much congressional support to make sure that our international bill for addressing violence against women gets passed into law. Thank you very much.